Hi everybody, I'm Reed Brockman.
And I'm Cristina Fragoso, and welcome to Civil Engineering Today. And this month we'd like to welcome Marcis Kempe. Welcome, Marcis. He is the executive director for the Waterworks Museum. And we have been having some great pre-show conversations, which we're going to try and work into this show.
We should go a little bit more into, before the museum, you've got a long history with Waterworks. Tell us a little bit about where you're coming from.
Well, I'm a civil engineer. I got into water supply really straight out of college and stayed with the Metropolitan Water System from the old MDC to Mass Water Resources Authority. So I've went up through the ranks basically to the point where I was basically the top water engineer at the place, and now I've retired. What do retired water engineers do? But they join waterworks museums. I was actually on. I spent a lot of my life collecting, the history of the system. So I had everything from artifacts to stories to whatever, So I helped equip the place, when the Waterworks Museum was created. I helped design the exhibits. Now I work there and I tell the stories. So it's a nice circle of life here,
That is nice. Now, how long has the museum been around? How did it get started?
It's only been open since 2011, March 2011. It was after a long process of the building itself is full of steam engines, right? It's some gorgeous looking equipment, and it needed to be preserved because these are the finest specimens in the country as far as I'm concerned. It was a difficult project because you needed to kind of extract the working water system from the place because you need to open to the public and not get into the security issues and all those sorts of things. So it took a creation of moving a lot of equipment, cutting a lot of pipes, getting out of the way, and then a funding mechanism which was turning the overall complex, it was a water supply complex, multiple stations, into residential condominium development with the museum at the heart, and now part of our funding is derived from the people who come to live at that site, knowing that they're sort of subsidizing a museum.
Oh, wow,
So we're talking by BC over at Chestnut Hill. We're talking on the reservoir?
Yes, right on the reservoir. We're just past Cleveland Circle. The reservoir itself, this was Boston's grandest park in the day. This is where everyone went for their Sunday drive, back in the late 1800s. And that's why, the reservoir is where the aqueducts end. From there, you're going into the city with cast iron piping. The pumps lift the water to reservoirs near there. So it made sense. It's the hub of the water system, So having a museum at that point lets us tell all the stories.
So that was the original hub, because that was a question we were going to ask, was basically the history of the waterworks in Boston. Like, from the beginning, what the Pilgrims used to modern equiment? Or give us the whole museum tour now.
The earth cooled, Well, I brought one prop along, since it's obviously laying here on the table. Since there are some fairly famous civil engineers involved here, I wanted to point out that in the early days of Boston, you had very clever people. I brought my little pipe here. This is actually a piece of pipe designed by an engineering giant, right? This is Loami Baldwin, who was one of the early civil engineers coming out of the Revolutionary War. He designed the Middlesex Canal and built it. And by the way, in his spare time, he designed Boston's water system. He was the chief engineer. I love the way this comes down. Sitting in a pub in Boston, there was a deal struck by a whole cast of characters to develop the Jamaica Pond Aqueduct Corporation. This is a piece of that pipe, right? This pipe came out of Washington Street not more than about 10 years ago, and was literally cut down.
More than 10 feet from here, too.
Really, we're right near the pipe route. And, it was urethane, so I can actually bring it around to show people and all that, but the pipe's still in the ground, basically, in a lot of locations. The trick was, in those days, if you were a civil engineer, the key skill here was the survey, basically, being able to take gravity flow, because you really didn't have steam pumping engines that made any sense back in those days, and bring water down through a bored log plugged end to end, basically with service lines going into the houses, and the whole thing sort of dribbled out, these leaked, of course.
What did they do, like tar pitch to connect them or something? What did they?
Pine pitch, yeah.
Pine pitch?
Yeah. So this must have been a lot of fun to manage, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But
So what is this date
the early
to, roughly?
This is from the 1796 system.
So very old.
Very old, right.
And everything you do has to go downhill.
In this case, yes. Right.
Until you get to a pump.
There were pumps available from England right? One of the entities in the United States, Philadelphia, decided to try pumping early because they wanted it from the river next to them,
Was that
not
Ben
from the
Franklin?
pond upstream. No, it was a couple of other engineers, but point was they bought an English water pump, had it shipped over, put it together, basically ran it, the boiler blew up. It was very discouraging, right? So they went back to having the river power water turbines basically to try to push water uphill. But this is just sort of the forerunner of real water supply. The real water supply in Boston's case is 1848. More famous engineers, Loamy Baldwin Sr. designed this pipe in 1796. Loamy Baldwin Jr., his son, trained Baldwin family. There's actually 4 or 5 engineers of note. They developed systems.
It's like the Sullivan.
Built,
Oh, yeah, like the
yeah,
Sullivans
very
and
much like the Sullivan
Boston Water and
family,
Sewer Commission.
But the more famous Sullivan was actually the son. He did things like he built the Montgomery Hill Monument, the Charlestown Dry Docks, Navy Yard, a lot of railroads, canals, lots of things like that. And he basically selected the source of Lake Cochituate bringing water in,
Oh, really?
a long gravity aqueduct, cast iron piping because it was new. In the 1830s you finally had cast iron pipe to use for water supply instead of these things. So that system was Boston's really first municipal system. It meant things like water for the poor, right? The old
Yeah.
private companies wouldn't sell to people who couldn't afford them. To sanitize the streets and everything. They still really didn't have much of a clue about waterborne disease and what the causes and all that. But they're very famous civil engineers. Baldwin planned it. A guy named John Jervis, national reputation civil engineer, designed it. Ellis Chesbrough helped build it. He went off to build Chicago system afterwards. So engineers kind of floated through the cities and did a lot of things. So lots of famous people involved in Boston.
I don't want to get too technical, but now you've got me curious. And you mentioned, one of the benefits was bringing water to the poor people. But if I'm thinking about the people like on Beacon Hill, so what did they like? Did they have to use head pressure, like a lot of gravity flow down to a point where there was enough head pressure to get it up like Beacon Hill area? Or?
Yes, and these days there wasn't enough, right? Jamaica Pond was too
They
low.
supplement it.
They sent the servants down to get the water.
Oh.
Right? In
Silly
those
me.
days, life was simpler, right? The first municipal system actually had a reservoir on the very top of Beacon Hill, where the back of the State House now is today. The State House extension was built on the site of the 1848 Beacon Hill Reservoir, which is a grand piece of construction. Beautiful arches. It was actually an elevated tank, of all things.
Wow.
It was built on piers. It had to be up to a certain elevation to function properly, to at least be above the roof line of the houses that it fed, and it was sheet lined with lead. You're going to love this.
Oh, that's
tasty.
handy.
Once again, their knowledge of chemistry wasn't very good,
Right.
So that reservoir function, I actually have the plaques from that planted in my front lawn over at the museum. They turned up in a Boston yard back a few years
Really?
ago, and we saved them. We got them over there, and now they're monuments in front of the museum.
I was going to say, if you're walking around the State House, can you see any of the architecture from this tank? Or-
There's a couple of stones left on the bottom, but all we're left with is old pictures. There's plenty of those at the museum.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, that's so from there, other engineers were involved. The system gets expanded. It gets also extended. Boston did a good job of getting clean water to its people. They came across the philosophy of reservoirs make more sense than treatment plants. You build a big reservoir, it polishes the water just by natural processes.
Wow.
And this informed, towards the turn of the century, a lot of towns were struggling. Some of the really poorest places you can think to drink water from were chosen as water sites, like the Mystic River and the Charles. Watertown drank from the Charles just below the Waltham Mills. Love that dirty
Ew.
water, right?
What year was this?
This is in the 1890s.
Okay.
Board of Public Health actually said, well, let's make a metropolitan district. Let's extend the privilege or the sort of the ability to enter to these towns that have these really poor water supplies to make enough water. Wachusett Reservoir gets built by, again, more famous engineers.
Right.
The system gets extended. Basically, they ran 100 miles of cast iron pipe all over the metro area, connected 20 communities almost immediately, retired the Mystic River, a really waterborne disease ripe supply.
Oh, yeah.
And a whole
There's a lot
slew
of
of other
industry up
really
there, too.
poor early choices. Same philosophy got followed again later as the system needed to be expanded. Quabbin Reservoir gets built. When that happens, some of the now fouled supplies, like the Upper Charles, that a lot of people were drinking from, or the
People drank from the Charles?
well, in as delicate a way as they could. They tried to drill wells next to it to try to get the water surface influence, but not the dirty stuff that was flowing down the center channel. You know?
Oh.
So, and there's
That is delicate.
long, epic struggles of some of these communities to keep their water clean enough to drink, but get enough of it. And a lot of towns gave up on the process and came into the metropolitan system right when Quabbin was built because of it.
Wise choice.
Yeah, the Boston system itself, the metropolitan system, had a supply that got fouled by what eventually became a Superfund site.
Oh, wow.
So the lower Sudbury River had to be retired because there was a dye plant turning at colors during part of the day. So all of this leads to sort of a later 1900s. The choices made at the beginning part of the century on selection of big reservoirs, building clean in clean locations. You get the water clean to begin with, outside of urban sort of pollution pressures, and get it to the people. It just makes so much sense, and that's gravity system for the most part. Some pumping. My place has got pumping engines that you'll be amazed by, but we tried to phase all that out, and that's literally what happened. That's what allowed the museum to happen. We phased out the pumping, so knowing that it was going to be phased out, they never had to tear out the old steam plants. So in the rest of the country, you have a lot of lake cities and river cities that had enormous pumping plants with equal size and age equipment that it all had to go because they had to modernize. They had to build treatment, or they had to build electric motors, or God knows what. So we're kind of unique like that. We get a lot of people from the rest of the country coming in, their jaws drop when they come in, like, wow, you managed to save this. That's cool,
I know.
One thing that's really amazing is, the museum's all about water, but the plant was actually running on steam, which is actually just another form of water. So you're actually talking about water in two totally different directions. You've got the whole treatment of water and people drinking clean water and the health issues.
Yeah.
And you go the other direction and show the
Economics.
power of water and what water can do power-wise.
Well, just a couple of neat things about the place. We had the first Waterworks laboratory in the country. In the 1880s, there was the sudden knowledge that it was all about bacteria. Bacteria were causing waterborne disease. What do you do if you're a water supplier? Build yourself a laboratory. Start studying it.
Right.
And we were the first. And the guy who is our sort of our god of microbiology is a guy named George Whipple, who was the guy who wrote the book, literally, The Microscopy of Drinking Water, that taught everybody else how to do microscopic analysis, bacterial testing, all those sorts of things. They cleaned up the mess that they found, right, basically, and others, improved water treatment, but in Boston, they kind of discovered the mess and kind of cleaned it up naturally by building reservoirs and all that. We also had on the steam side, some of the most notable mechanical engineers in the country kind of floated through there. One of our pumps is by Worthington. Henry Worthington was the god of pumping. In 1850s, he comes up with the first practical waterworks pumps, and a couple of other big mechanical engineers. One of our engines is a custom designed by a guy named Erasmus Levitt, who was the second president of ASME, but was also declared as a national mechanical engineering landmark. It was so unusual.
Wow.
We also had an engine designed by the 12th president.
By the 12th?
No, not of the United States.
But
ASME.
of ASME, so there's some really famous engineers were involved. A lot of civils too. I'm kind of sure. I could give you a list of dozens, literally, that went on to national fame.
No, I have a lot of friends who went into that branch as well.
Or that went off to other systems and built their water.
It's a real fine line between civil and mechanical when you're talking about the water world. There's people like another ASCE president or Boston Society of Civil Engineers president, John Freeman. Freeman.
And then you have microbiologists.
He was related to MIT, but even though he made the Charles River Dam, he's really famous for his studying fire suppression and how much water pressure, how high you can make a building.
And he also was one of the engineers for the Los Angeles water system, by the way.
Oh, we'll get onto that, onto the movie world.
They all went on to fame and glory somewhere else too. We seem to share engineers with New York, but all the other big cities. Most of the water supply started on the East Coast, and the knowledge kind of transferred to the West Coast. So our guys kind of went as seed, started other water supplies in other places.
I imagine people come to the museum for research, but do they ever come maybe for the technology, even the steam technology? Is it still in use? Is it still in practice anywhere?
No, it is still in practice in all modern power plants, right? Because what is a power plant but something that takes thermal energy, meaning you're burning fossil fuels or doing a nuclear reaction or something that heats the water to boiling, that goes through a steam turbine, right? The turbine's coupled with a dynamo that produces the electricity, and that's what you're trying to do. We did actually have some steam turbines in the place in the late stages. That was sort of a 1930s technology that came in. We didn't save them because, you know what, the heyday of steam pumping is the big triple expansion,
See, I was going to ask you,
yeah.
is any percentage of the Quabbin now still used for that sort of?
No, right now we've
Where
got
do they get
everything
it? The water
nicely
supply?
set up so that, the source reservoirs are high, the deep rock tunnels can get the water down here with pressure, and we just sort of let it out to people's houses. It's a nice quiet ride now. It doesn't have to go through any...
And it's strictly used for drinking water? No other?
Oh, yeah. Well, water supply to all the communities for whatever uses and all that. But, steam pumping was kind of retired by most places long, long ago. MWA hung on to it because they knew the end was coming with big deep rock tunnels being built,
Right.
So there's, another set of engineers bringing that stuff in. And when that was ready in the 1970s, place gets shut down. Now it's time to make it a museum, And unfortunately, it took 20 years to get the whole exit strategy properly thought out. But once it was, now it's appreciated. We actually had the convention of water people in town last year, and God, I never saw so many visitors.
Oh.
That's great.
So we're
that is good.
getting a national reputation amongst the engineers.
No, it's
But that's
nice.
what-
I'm actually going to go. Before I met you, I didn't even know it existed. I want to go.
And I think that's something we got to do. I think engineers we know the importance of water, but it's funny, we were saying it before the show.
History is so
like,
fascinating.
Movies love to focus on how important water is. And even the American Medical Association says that, the greatest thing that improved the quality of human life is when we figured out how to get clean water and get rid of the waste.
There's still so many countries constantly that are struggling with that. There's so many.
But Chinatown, Rango, the movie list could go on and on about the
Batman,
importance.
there's some odd ones that
Right.
use that as a theme,
But actually, this brings us kind of back into the question as far as, it sounds like maybe in the mid-19th century, the mood and the will of the people was much more supportive.
It was, from the sort of public standpoint, they really wanted, premium water supply. And the philosophy chosen by the Boston metropolitan area was a good one. They would go out and get the water, even though it was a little more expensive to go west and build a conveyance, the aqueducts and things. It made more sense because it was cleaner, better, more healthy, And that got us through a lot of dark times, the
People
fact that it was
didn't mind
gravity
paying their
powered.
rates?
Where you did have sort of social impact and conflict is, when you're building reservoirs, obviously you have, it's an extreme disturbance to the place that the reservoir is built, So we have a history with Western Massachusetts. They had a lot of impact from that. The balance is that by doing that and keeping the water clean, lives were saved in the Boston metropolitan area because you could retire the bad water supplies.
Now, at what point, because I know that it didn't start out as a municipal supply, at what point did Boston move from being, the water was a private company you paid for it to a more generalized
It was
public?
fairly early. Boston was one of the few in the beginning that wanted to get past, the run for business kind of water supplies because not everybody was served. The poor were getting what they needed. It was in the 1848 system. It took almost 20 years of haranguing, basically, to get there.
Yeah, that's what we wanted to hear, some stories.
Businessmen did not want to let go very easily, right?
Right, there's a little profit to be made there.
Constantly suggesting, for instance, the engineers who basically were looking out for the public were trying to send the thinking towards a large water body, like a Lake Achicha with a very big watershed. Business interests would buy a pond and say, all right, Boston should drink from this pond, and it was mechanically more difficult. It had no expansion possibility, but the facility was owned by the business, and there was money to be made here. And there's an enormous amount of influence from the business community on the politicians, and so that's why it dragged out for 20 years. It took for a very long time. until there was unrelenting pressure from the public and the medical community.
Oh, the
and-
medical
and,
community,
you know,
I imagine,
weighing
yeah.
in, like, my God, let's solve this thing. Let's get some water in
Yeah,
here.
that was
you
scarlet
know?
fever that must have been a real
Well, that's not the classic waterborne one. The typhoid and cholera were the
Right.
ones
typhoid,
that
right, and
did
cholera,
the, you know,
cholera, right.
yeah, there were a couple of widespread epidemics. Boston was never that hard hit. You know, there were times when typhoid was an issue, but the medical community wanted the water for just general sanitation, you know, to help wash down the tenements and.
Yeah, there was really, I mean, there was terrible. Like the North End was an extremely poor neighborhood back then.
So there's like a fascinating law history somewhere too of lots of fights
Yeah.
or legislative history.
Yeah, we went
lots of
through
transcripts.
all sorts of stages. You know, the fights with other sort of donor basins, Quabbin being sort of interstate waters. You know, we went to the Supreme Court with Connecticut and the War Department and navigation in the Connecticut River, and you know. So yeah, water issues tend to get messy. You know.
So if someone were motivated, we could make our own version of Chinatown based on that little portion of Boston history. Is what-
right. There have been
let's let the
interesting
good
things
guys prevail.
suggested. Yeah.
They did prevail, right?
Yay! And actually, that brings us, we're getting down to the last
Yep.
couple minutes.
I just wanna-
We got to quit when the good guys are winning.
Yeah, but we just want to give a plug. It's Waterworks Museum, all one word.org.
Yes.
And people can get more information and
Yep.
go there. I'm
Yep.
definitely going.
So as we're talking about old historic landmarks, we've got a
We've
big
got tons in
historic landmark that we're going to be
Massachusetts.
celebrating this weekend. So on May 16th, which is this Saturday, I guess there's going to be, for everybody watching, there is a there's an auto dealership that's giving free food and drinks to everybody that goes. There's all kinds of activities. There's drum decorating, and there's going to be a parade of the kids. This is in Ipswich. The Choate Bridge is 250 years old. The president of ASCE, the incoming president, Mark Woodson's coming to town. We're putting a landmark plaque on that. It's the second oldest bridge in the country, but it's the oldest bridge of its type, the oldest two-span stone arch in the country.
It's
250 years, very pretty. Gonna have
Part
a
of
big party and all
133.
kinds of hands-on activities. We had a poetry contest, and they're going to be there. The community band's going to be playing music.
Is there an age limit
First
on who can
Ipswich
make
Bank
drums?
has donated. No, not an age limit on the drums. And every kid that comes also gets a toy flute, and they're getting chopsticks as drumsticks. And
Oh, wow.
going to be awesome. And First Ipswich Bank donated the money so that they can have an official permanent lighting of the bridge for now on, and they're going to have the grand light up at night. So the party starts at like noon and goes on into the night. And Brooksby Village judged our poetry contest, and they're going to be there. Some of the winners are going to be there reading their poems and
There's a lot going
lot
on.
going on. Very busy day. So this is, I guess it's all intermixed also that Ipswich Ale is also having a festival in town the same day. So lots of good reasons to go to Ipswich. Everybody pack up noontime on Saturday and
What's the
enjoy
history?
it.
Oh, I know. I'm like, oh, so where does Ipswich get their water?
Yeah.
What happened with
Well, I
Ipswich
don't know
water
why.
supply?
Well,
Yeah. So I think that's all the time we have for this show. But
Yeah, and thank you so much for joining us. Please join us next month. We'll have Rich Davies on to talk about the Olympics, so that's going to be exciting. And thank you
and
again,
Marcus,
Marcus,
thank you
so
very
much.
Oh,
That
my
was
pleasure.
I
Thank
think
you for
this
inviting me.
conversation probably could go on
Go on
for
for
hours.
days.
Yeah,
you'll be
I
back.
could do that. Yeah.
probably could. Okay, thank
Thanks,
you
Marcus.
so
Thank
much.
you, everybody.